Precious. I'm here at DEP to interview a radiation health expert. Let's go. I'm here with a radiation health professional from DEP, Robert Zaccano. When it comes to radiation, how often would you see it?
We're exposed to radiation constantly in our lives. A certain amount of it comes from the sun itself, and that's cosmic radiation. We also have radiation that's present in the ground, in the water, and it's everywhere.
Okay.
A certain amount of it is produced for certain purposes. We like to say if you've ever eaten anything, if you've ever driven across a parking lot, if you have had a medical procedure, you've probably been exposed to radiation somewhere along that line, or that material has. So we use flow gauges to measure transfer of water or materials, moisture density gauges in the construction of parking lots.
Okay.
And of course, X-ray and radiation therapy is used in hospitals to diagnose and to save lives.
So natural radiation, is it as harmful as man-made?
There's an old expression that the poison is the dose, and it's the level of radiation that increases the risk.
Okay.
And now what we operate under in radiation protection is what's called a linear no threshold dose, which is we try to limit the exposure to the greatest extent possible. And that's the ALARA principle, as low as reasonably achievable. So we don't have a low-end threshold that, below this level it's perfectly safe. No, we assume that any radiation could potentially be bad. But obviously the higher the dose, the greater the potential for damage.
Yeah.
Radon is a big problem in the state of Pennsylvania. We have clay-bearing soils that contain uranium that decays down to radon gas. And it's released up into typically in basements because it's a little heavier than air. That's why people check for radon gas in the homes.
Okay.
To render that safe, what they do, they put in a system that draws the radon gas, uses negative pressure, and vents it out across the roof of the building and disperses it across a wider area.
Okay.
So in that case, what we're doing is reducing the concentration. Radiation has three factors that you always have to consider, and it's time, distance, and shielding. The longer you are exposed to a source, the more potential for harm. The closer you are to a source, the more potential for harm. And the less that is between you and the source, the greater the potential for harm. And depending on the type of radiation, different things act as better shields than others. Alpha particles are very, very large. A sheet of paper will block an alpha particle. When you're talking about gamma radiation or X-ray, you need lead to actually block it.
Man-made or any kind of radiation affect the environment? Is it able to kill trees, vegetation, cause unnatural weather patterns?
It doesn't affect weather, but what radiation does, ionizing radiation interrupts the reproduction of DNA molecules. So you're breaking the DNA strand, and when it, now you've got gene damage that gets replicated in that organism. You have enough gene damage, and then cells can become cancerous or become non-viable. It takes a fairly large dose of radiation to produce an acute response where you're going to kill something. The greater potential is long-term damage. And that's For radon gas, for example, going back to that analogy, that's why they would compare certain radon levels to somebody who was like a 3-4 pack a day smoker. There's a potential there for long-term damage over time.
Okay. So as you were saying about how it damages the DNA genes, and such as like in pregnant women when they're exposed to radiation, how it can harm their child. So in later generations, is it possible for this to then show up in
The damage accumulates over time? Yeah, a bad copy of a bad copy.
it would just keep going along. So is
Yeah,
it
that's possible.
at all possible for them to become immune along the line, or no?
That you're we operate under the principle that there's nothing that is completely immune to radiation.
Okay.
That it's that linear no threshold.
Okay.
There is no safe level. There are levels that are acceptable, and that's what we use for X-rays.
Yeah.
You know, if you need to have a chest X-ray done, our folks in our program go to hospitals, doctors' offices, measure the quality and intensity of the X-ray beams, make sure that it's diagnostic yet at a controlled level, that it's going to produce a benefit with minimal harm.
Okay. So radiation, when consumed, is it much more harmful if it's put directly into the body instead of, say, just breathing it in and being surrounded by it?
Ingestion of radioactive material, especially if it's, well, for example, let's go with an alpha particle.
Okay.
Okay, alpha particles, if you remember, blocked by a sheet of paper
They're
or
very
your
big.
skin, right? If you've ingested those particles, now they're working from the inside out. If you absorb that into your bloodstream, much more dangerous. And the classic example of that was the radium girls who would paint watch dials during the war and lick the brush to get a point on them. Radium looks to the body like calcium, and there are a lot of blood vessels inside the lips and the jaw. They would absorb that radium, which was an alpha emitter, into their jaw bones, and their jaws would literally decay. And through ingestion, yes. It's much more dangerous to breathe something in or to absorb it.
Okay.
And one of the things that, if I can just give you a distinction too, being exposed to radiation doesn't necessarily make a person radioactive.
Okay.
No more than if you go and have a chest X-ray that you're now radioactive for a period of time. Picture it like a beam of light. It shines through your body and it's gone. Something that's important, and it happens occasionally because people use radioactive material in gauges and so forth in construction. Sometimes things get stolen or mislaid, or there's a legacy, something that was left behind from decades ago. But because of the half-life, which means half of it becomes stable over time.
Yes.
Some of these half-lives are very long. If you ever see this symbol, once again, time, distance, shielding. Do not pick it up. Do not put it in your pocket. Do not carry it around. That is a symbol that indicates something is dangerous. Most cell phones have a location feature built into them.
Yes.
Take a picture of where it is so you have the location data. Back away immediately and report it to the authorities, which can be the department or local law enforcement, or if it's a state park, report it to a park ranger so that it can be handled correctly and safely. We don't know what it is. If it has a radiation symbol on it, it is potentially dangerous, and sadly we have had people hurt themselves by picking up something that they didn't know was going to hurt them.
So I actually want to backtrack to half-lives. So in the process of cleaning up And you said that you sometimes let it just die off by itself because it can, the half-life.
What we call it storage through, you store it until it decays down to background. We have a natural level of radiation that is falling from the sky and from the ground. When you've decayed something down enough, it becomes indistinguishable from that background level. It depends on the material.
Because it ranges greatly from years, days.
Half-lives can be measured in nanoseconds to hundreds of thousands of years. And it depends on the material and how it decays and the whole process of it. It's fascinating physics.
So what if something just takes far too long to decay? Is there a process that you'd go through to actually physically clean it up out of the surroundings?
What we'll do is collect the material and put it into a safe storage location.
Okay.
Fuel pools for reactors, shipping casks, things that are very secure that somebody couldn't accidentally break into. The shielding part of it, that it's shielded so somebody standing next to it or above it isn't going to be receiving dangerous levels of radiation, and that it's safe.
Okay.
The other thing that we can do with some of these materials is they can be repurposed. Things with very long half-lives can be reused and used in medical purposes, again, research or treatment.
So as someone who has been in radioactive zones, how do you protect yourself?
Well, we monitor ourselves. We wear badges that are sent in quarterly that show us how much exposure we've gotten. We have electronic devices, basically all based off of the Geiger counter, that measure how much radiation we're getting. We can read those instantly. These have to be sent out. Some of them are read instantly. We also have dosimeters that have alarms on them. So if we have a threshold that we're trying to avoid, the alarm will go off, and then we know to back away, time, distance, and shielding.
Yes.
And protect ourselves. You'll see, I'm sure if you've had any medical procedures done, the X-ray tech is wearing a lead apron. And that's to reduce the exposure to them.
Okay. So radiation suits, are they able to protect against all different alpha, beta, or gamma, or really only
To a point.
to a point?
Yes.
Okay.
There is nothing that is completely impervious to radiation. That's kind of a science fiction thing. And there's no such thing as an anti-radiation pill. Anyone that's trying to sell you that is basically selling snake oil. It's not real. That's science fiction. It's like artificial gravity. It's not real.
Okay. So radiation is just something we can never escape from, basically.
No, but it's something that you have to treat with respect. But it is around us all the time. It comes from that great big fusion reactor up in the sky. So we can't avoid it completely in our lives, but use it safely, effectively, carefully. And radiation is a very important component in our lives. Radiation therapy saves the lives of hundreds of thousands of cancer patients. And things like X-ray allows us to diagnose medical conditions that were invisible in the body before. The innovation of CT scans, we find so many cancers that would have gone to the point that when the symptoms showed, it was too late. So all these modalities are an important part of our lives now.
Okay.
And treating it respectfully and correctly is a good balance.
Thank you, Bob, for everything. Thank you for your time and the information.
You're very welcome. theater too, so.
The raw copy, this is gonna be hilarious.
Send me the blooper reel.
Today I'm with a